House Intelligence Committee now writing up the report, made that available to be seen yesterday by congressmen and women. And, of course, now we move to the House Judiciary Committee. And ultimately, if the vote goes the way many think it will go to the Senate, where this next gentleman will have a say about whether the president is guilty of those charges or not. He is Senator Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
Good morning, Gary. I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing very well, and glad to be back from vacation and back in the middle of things here again. You're watching the impeachment process right now. You've seen it go through the House Intelligence Committee's hearings on the impeachment probe. Now they're going to vote, I guess, tonight around 6:30 as to whether or not to send this on to the House Judiciary Committee. And the House Judiciary Committee gets a chance to hear it. And ultimately, that will get sent on or not get sent on to the full House for its consideration. What are your thoughts about this right now as you're watching the process take place that could eventually end up in your hands as part of the Senate?
Well, generally, Gary, I think it's been a badly flawed process. If the question is the process that our House colleagues have pursued here, I think it's pretty clear that they set out to find a way to make the case to impeach the president, and this was the goal from before he was sworn in. Let's just be honest. Whatever one thinks of the president, the Democrats are not really bashful about acknowledging they wanted him removed from office from before he was actually sworn in. So they think they found something, and they're going to run with it. My guess is that it will go through the process in the House. My guess is they will vote to adopt articles of impeachment. As you may recall, only 2 Democrats voted against pursuing the impeachment inquiry.
Right.
They will face a somewhat different vote, which will be essentially the conclusion of the inquiry and the decision to actually basically indict the president and recommend his removal from office. That's what the next vote will be for the full House, the next important vote. There's procedural votes along the way. And we're guessing here. I mean, I'm assuming that it'll pretty much follow the last vote, and probably only a couple of Democrats vote no. But it'll be interesting to see if that's the way it holds up. And I frankly am not going to spend a whole lot of time reading the troves of documents and the leaked material and all the rest. I'm going to wait and see if they actually adopt articles of impeachment and they send them over. Then, okay, we're going to have a trial in the Senate, and at that point, the Senate is going to have to do its constitutional job and sit as a jury, and we'll cast our votes. And
then obviously you'll have information that will be sitting there because it'll be very specific in terms of, or we would assume it'll be very specific in terms of what those charges are, and obviously specificity is going to be a big part of that, and provability will be a big part of that as well, right?
Well, exactly, and the nature of the trial, I think, is still an open question. Should it come to that, right? If the articles of impeachment are, in fact, adopted and they're sent over to the Senate, the only thing we know for sure is that we have to have a trial. But, for instance, will there be a lot of witnesses? Will the president's attorneys call a lot of witnesses? Will this take many weeks? Or will this be a relatively short exercise where certain facts in the case, such as the famous conversation between the President Trump and the President of Ukraine, will there be an acknowledgement on both sides? Yeah, this is a rough transcript of what happened. The Democrats think it's an impeachable offense. The president thinks it's not. You know, we could have a presentation on that and then have a vote. So we just don't know, Gary. It could be a long, complicated process with lots of witness. It could be relatively short.
I was fascinated yesterday that Mr. Zelensky came out again and said, no, there was no quid pro quo. It doesn't seem like anybody's really listening to this guy. And since he was the other end of the conversation there with President Trump, you're saying, well, geez, doesn't he count for anything at all here?
Yeah, if you're the guy who's getting bribed, which is the latest way that the Democrats are choosing to calculate that, if you're the guy getting bribed, you have to presume, in order to be bribed, you kind of have to know that there's something on the table in return for doing something else. And he has repeatedly said there was never any such arrangement. So, that's an inconvenient fact in this for our Democratic colleagues.
When you're looking at the president right now, obviously he is over with NATO today, spending some time there. And one of the complaints that he had was that they're holding the impeachment stuff on this week when he's out of the country. Is there any I guess, is there any grist to that at all? In other words, when you have a president out of the country and he's talking with people overseas and so forth, are we undercutting him at all as a person who's representing us there? Or is that just business as usual anymore here in the year 2019?
Well, I think the fact that there is an impeachment proceeding well underway that has the support, at least as of the last vote, of a majority in the House, I think that does undermine the president somewhat. I mean, it diminishes his standing and a little bit of his, latitude in negotiating with foreign powers. They see him as this is a sign that maybe he's somewhat weakened at home, and maybe they speculate about what it implies for his reelection prospects. So I think it's not so much a particular proceeding that happens this week as the fact that this whole thing is underway.
Let me ask you something just from a separation of powers, individual branch of government standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
You're part of the Senate and obviously part of the Congress, and Congress has oversight powers, although nowhere in the Constitution does it specifically say that. It's an implied power. Now, what's interesting about that, and I've asked this question of several people, and I wanted to ask it of you today. At what point in time does oversight become interference? In other words, if I were to say, I want to have a transcript of every one of your daily conversations with anybody you speak to out of your office, I would dare say I'd be looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of transcripts. And it appears to me that we are encroaching, if you will, upon a president's power and the executive branch's power to conduct business in a candid way. Obviously, nobody wants anybody to do anything illegal here, and yet, I feel like at what point in time do we go from oversight into interference? Is that a fair question?
Look, it's a very fair question. The only problem, Gary, is it's been asked since George Washington was president. You're right. You're absolutely right to point to this. This has been a tension between the legislature and the executive that goes back to the founding of the Republic.
You're right.
And the implied, it's very clear, I think, implied oversight authority. One of the things that's maddening to me is that Congress willfully gives away much of the responsibility that the Congress assigns to us.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, in the trade realm, the Constitution is unambiguous. It's Congress's responsibility to regulate trade with other countries and establish tariffs if we're going to have tariffs. And yet Congress is more than happy to simply, turn its back and let the president do whatever he'll do. I think that's inconsistent with the Constitution. I'm not sure it's even constitutionally permissible for the Congress to, ignore its responsibility and just punt it over to the president. And yet, if they think there's an opportunity to get some embarrassing, transcripts from a phone conversation, then there's members of Congress who they'll move heaven and earth to get that. So I'm a little skeptical about the motivation sometimes that's behind the what is described as oversight.
And conversely, I also am opposed to executive orders overtaking what the Congress should do in terms of legislation. I feel the same way about the court system. The Congress has the power of legislation, but for example, when it comes to doing something about our borders right now, we're not seeing that. And ultimately, then we have the president who starts to do executive orders, and we saw with President Obama, we're seeing it with President Trump, and I'm not in favor of that either. So I think you make a great point. Senator, I appreciate you being with us this morning. I wish you a very Merry Christmas, and look forward to talking to you in the new year, if not before, and we appreciate you taking time today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Gary.